So my name is Jerome Billeter, and I'm the Corporate Business Manager at the HousingLIN. So after last week's break from our HAPPI Hour webinars, I'm really excited about today's session, and I'm sure you all are. So there's definitely a big appetite from our members and our consultancy clients to learn more about marketing housing choices for older people. And today's session will explore how you can better describe your senior living housing products, drawing on research by Shakespeare Martineau, who will share their latest findings, and also from the experience of our fantastic speakers. So our speakers today include Emma Houghton, who's the head of PR at Shakespeare Martineau, Julian Meyer, Professor Emerita of Nursing and the Chair of the Older People's Housing Taskforce, Mario Ambrosi, Director of Communications and Marketing at Anchor, and also Chair of the Housing and Aging Alliance, and Emma Webster, ESG and Corporate Affairs Director at Life Story Group. So for today's session, I'm just doing a brief introduction. I'm going to hand over to Louise Drew in a second, who will chair today's session. And I just wanted to quickly make a note about, so there's quite a lot of delegates today in this for this session. So, and the time is limited, so we're going to go through all the presentations, and you can post your questions during the presentations, which we'll answer in the last slot. And just a note that we may not have time to go through all your questions. So if there's any burning questions that we have not been able to answer, or if you want to find out more from our speakers or from the HousingLIN, do not hesitate to email us at info@housinglin.org.uk, and we'll be really happy to forward your questions to our speakers or answer them ourselves. So I will now hand over to Louise Drew, Partner and Head of Building Communities at Shakespeare Martineau, who will chair today's session. So over to you, Louise.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session. I am too very interested to hear what the speakers have got to say today. It's quite a variety, diverse speakers, and I think it'd be really good to see what summary and conclusions we can get out of this hour and a bit session. So first of all, I just want to do a little bit more of an introduction to the people that are going to be speaking to you today. So we're going to start with Emma Houghton this time. We've got a couple of Emmas, so it might get slightly confusing. She's the head of PR at my firm, Shakespeare Martineau, which is a law practice. And she is also protecting our reputation and raising the profile of our firm by leading on our research projects and white papers. Emma is actually a biology graduate and combines her scientific brain with more than 12 years experience in PR to tell a great story through data, analysis and insight. And I'm hopeful that you'll see that at the end of her short session. We then have Professor Julianne Meyer. She retired in September 2019, but I don't think any of us appreciate the fact that she's definitely not retired. Indeed, she is very, very busy, and she holds an emerita position and is the chair of the Older Persons Taskforce. She's a former registered nurse and a qualified teacher who led research and development in care for older people at City, University of London, for 23 years. Her style of working is evidence-informed, relationship-centred, appreciative and action-oriented, and she's best known for her work in care homes, and in 2006 was one of the co-founders of My Home Life, which is an international initiative to promote quality of life in care homes. She will be bringing some insights into what has been discussed, some of the evidence that have been gathered as part of the Older Persons Task Force. Now, she might not be able to confirm too much today, but she'll certainly be able to give a little bit of insight that I think people will find useful. We'll then move on to Mario Ambrosi. He's the Communications and Marketing Director at Anchor, and he's also chair of the Housing and Aging Alliance. He's a former journalist with more than 20 years experience in communications, and Mario joined Anchor in 2004. He's held a number of senior roles and led several award-winning initiatives and campaigns with Anchor, and has been listed in PR Week's Power Book of the most influential PR professionals in the UK. He's chair of the Housing and Ageing Alliance and co-chair of the National Care Forum's Marketing and Communications Group, and a former trustee of the Employers Network for Equality and Inclusion. So as you can see, we've got very busy people. Finally, we'll get to hear from Emma Webster, who is the ESG and Corporate Affairs Director for Life Story, which is made up of 2 retirement brands, Pegasus and Renaissance, and Anthology, which is an open market housing brand. She leads on ESG and national policy work, as well as the site-specific political and community engagement activities and communications across her group. Emma was a local councillor for 16 years and has held various cabinet positions, including highways and transport, regeneration, community safety, sorry, I can't get my words out today, and housing. So I don't want to waste any more time on introductions, because people have got plenty that they want to say and share with you. So we're going to come to Emma Houghton first, who's going to share some slides with you, which is around data that we collected, I think it was last year, Emma, or was it the early part of this year? I can't recall, from older people over the age of 55 and their attitudes in the main towards retirement housing.
Can everyone see my slide? Great.
Yes,
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah.
So yeah, as Lou says, I'm going to talk through some of the research data that we've been collecting over the past couple of years. All of the data that's going to be discussed in this presentation is from 2 of our white papers. Both are available to download in full, because there's absolutely heaps more data in there. I'm only able to give sort of a few brief highlights, so I think Sally will share those. In both reports, we're looking at the importance of language, we're delving into the misconceptions of what retirement living is, what's stopping people from moving in or considering the retirement living, and by focusing on this important housing type, we're also seeing how we could potentially alleviate the housing crisis. So just to give you an overview of what we've done, over these 2 research projects, we've worked with dozens of registered providers across private, public and third sector. We've gathered public opinion, insights from the retirement living customers and our target demographics, so the over 50s and over 55s. And we've also tested our hypothesis that the most likely people to have a home that's too big for them are older people. And we did that through collecting data of 200,000 social housing properties that were for the general needs market across 200 different local authorities, and I'll talk about some of the results later on from that one. So just looking at language, we know that language and perception is an issue. The care sector took obviously a huge reputational bashing during COVID, and some of those negative associations have wrongly filtered into the retirement living sector. So, you know, from our data, public, you know, think that an old people's home is the same as retirement living, and 1 in 5 would consider them to be the same thing as a nursing home. And given that the offer is for housing for older people, we wanted to ask the public, well, how old is old? And the answer is always older than me. So, you know, more than 70% of housing providers that we surveyed defined an older person as over 55 years old, but just 20% of consumers would actually choose the same definition. And this graph is a little bit complicated at first glance, but essentially what we're showing here is that the older you are, the more likely you're to perceive an older person as being older than you. So, you know, 8 out of 10 people who are aged over 55 that responded to our survey thought that an older person was either 65, 75 or 85 years old. So the impact of this is that if retirement living is defined as being for older people, a lot of the public will not consider this to be for them, because they'll always think that the product is for somebody older, which is always older than them. So thinking about targeting people, you know, we're looking at marketing housing for older people. So when we look at the responses from those who are sort of approaching middle age, you know, like 45 years and over, when we asked them on that first slide on the left, what would encourage them to move into retirement housing schemes, we see an interesting shift between the ages of 45 plus versus 55 years and over. So our data shows that around 1 in 10 of those who are aged 45 to 55 can't be encouraged to move into a retirement living scheme. However, this more than doubles once you're over the age of 55. Similarly, between the ages of 45 and 54, 1 in 10 don't know what factors would encourage them, and this drops to 1 in 20 of those 55 plus. So it kind of indicates that essentially, once you reach 55, you're pretty much set in your opinions on retirement living. Nothing's going to convince you. You're not interested. Your mind's made up. So that's why we're saying that we need to be targeting people earlier and improving those perceptions earlier. So it's something that's aspirational for when the time is right for you. I mentioned before that we were looking about under occupation. So thinking about that housing crisis and a dire need for more family homes, as we all know, there is a need for those starter homes. We need to pull people through the housing ladder. We wanted to test our hypothesis that older people are most likely to be living in a home that's too big for their needs. And this is the data where, as I mentioned before, we had 200,000 social housing properties across the UK. And we considered a property to be under-occupied if it had a single tenant or a couple in a 3+ bedroomed house. So from that 200,000 pieces of data, we found that 1 in 10 general needs rented properties are under-occupied. But as you can see from this pie chart here, you know, 40% of those are of a lead tenant who's 65 plus. The next 27% are for a lead tenant who's aged over 55 to 64, and it goes down the younger that the lead tenant is. So the idea is that, you know, if there was suitable housing that was seen as aspirational, we'd have somewhere for people to move on, which is why we have our moving on report, and this would free up more family homes. So speaking about right sizing, we asked the public when they would consider right sizing and if they would consider. Sadly, 6 in 10 had no plan to and didn't know if they would ever right size one day, and the people planning to right size decreased with age. So again, you know, as you know, people as they get older, they're sort of set in their ways and they don't really want to make the change and to move on. So what's putting them off from the idea of right sizing in retirement living? So the top 4 answers are on the screen now. I'm sure you can read them, but what we found really interesting is that actually those who are aged 75 plus were the most likely to state that they didn't want to live in a community of older people. And that was really interesting because when I spoke to, you know, 20, 30 different residents living at retirement villages and extra care, a lot of them were saying, you know, we need younger people. That's what gives us life. You know, that's what creates a spark in the community. And so many people are coming here too late. And so again, it just backs into our research about targeting people earlier. Another stat that's not on this presentation here is that 1 in 10 respondents believed that their health would deteriorate if they moved into a right-sized property. So again, it's that, you know, negative misconception that later living confusion with care homes. So that's part of the perception that needs to change. What else needs to change? Well, obviously there are a number of things, and this is not by any way an extensive list. However, you know, working across the industry and professional services like ourselves, you know, we can lobby government into making planning changes, introducing those all-important youth classes, looking for proactive investment, and that shift from the obsession that we've got with first-time buyers. You know, why not move some of that prioritisation to last-time buyers, and as I was saying before, sort of pull people through the housing market. And you know, we need to keep working together, championing the benefits, and continuing with this research that we're doing. Which brings me on to our next step. So we know how important that language is. We know how important the misconceptions are in the sector, and you know, those that have been listening intently, I've flicked from later living, retirement living, housing for older people. There's all these different terms that we've got going on, so there isn't really much in the way of consistency in language. So our next phase that we're working on is sort of a glossary of terms and a cheat sheet to retirement living that could be used for professionals. So, you know, other legal professionals, accountants, estate planning, you know, people that are advising on wills, but it could also be used by the public. And what it's going to include is definitions of schemes and what defines an older person, different types of retirement living and the care levels that they each provide, tenure descriptions, and then creating like a matrix to kind of indicate what tenure options there typically are for different types of schemes. And throughout this whole process, we're consulting with a variety of experts, so across the sector, including the Taskforce, and we hope that we should have this document as sort of a handy download sometime in the new year. So I think I'm well within time, and any questions, please pop them in the chat box and try our best to answer them later on.
Many thanks, Emma. Questions, pop in the Q&A.
Oh, really? Okay.
If you've got any comments, just pop them into the chat box. Okay, shall we turn to the professor and use her use her very precious time for the good?
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to share with you where the Taskforce is at. And I do hope that if you've got particular evidence or recommendations you'd like to make me aware of, do put them in the chat box, and I'm sure Jerome will send them through at a later stage. So I've spoken before about the Taskforce, but for those of you who haven't heard, just very briefly, we're wanting to understand the market in England now and in the future in terms of older people's housing. And this is an initiative that is a collaboration between the Department of Health and the Department for Levelling Up Housing in Communities. And we were working with Rachel McLean and Helen Waitley. They set this initiative up. And as you know, Rachel is no longer in post, and I look forward, hopefully next week, to meeting Les Rowley, who is taking over. So the focus of the Taskforce is how can we support people to stay in their own homes for as long as possible, if that's what they want? And how can we enable people to right size and release their family homes, indeed, if that's what they want? But also, how can we expand the quality and the quantity of the older people's housing market? Because we know that we don't have enough. Each year, probably building, you hear 5,000 to 7,000, when actually it's estimated that what's really needed is 30,000 to 50,000. And we've been asked to focus on the lower to middle income market. So these are people who maybe have their own home, but not access to a lot of cash, or indeed perhaps people who have been renting, but have a small pension. So they are our focus. We started on the 1st of May, and we're roughly halfway through and are presenting an interim report and recommendations to the new minister and to Helen. We've had a call for evidence, and we were pleased with the response. 178 organisations and individuals responded, and we're sifting our way through that at the moment. I've now done about 20 site visits and been able to talk with residents, relatives and staff. And we have out 5 surveys, one with housing officers, housing developers, planning professionals, private sector capital investors and directors of adult social care. So that should bring in some new information. And we've had significant engagement with various stakeholders and policy experts. So in the second half of our work, we'll be testing out our ideas through roundtables, focus groups, and further research. And we're doing a number of roundtables, one on policy research, one on supported housing, one with local authorities and directors of adult social care, integrated care system leaders, one focused on inequalities, one on home builders, one for looking at dementia, heads of housing, one for the investment sector and one for planning professionals. And our final report is due in May next year. So I thought I'd give you a little flavour of what we're thinking about. And I think one of the things to begin with is the need for strategic and system leadership. So we're really interested in the way in which in the Netherlands there is a similar task force who are actually working day to day on trying to solve the issues and work with government on things as they arise from their day-to-day work. So rather than coming up with a set of recommendations, they've got an action-oriented programme, and we want to get that message across, that there is greater need perhaps for collaborative working across the various departments of government, but also to stay in touch with the various stakeholders and people with lived experience to actually see the implementation of any recommendations through. And we are exploring what it would look like to have a rights-based approach for every single older person, including those with dementia, so that they know what they can legally expect and what that might look like and what that might take. Does it need an Older People's Act, or can we do it without? We're thinking around the need for data and to continue to research and innovate in this sector, and we're wondering what a strategy might look like in that regard. In the context of what Emma was talking about, very much agree that that there is a need for agreed terminology in a language that consumers can understand. And yeah, you know, retirement no longer seems right. People are working for so much longer, and older people, I heard yesterday from an estate agent where they have actually sent out a brochure to advertise a free service for people who might be thinking of moving, but because it's got a picture of an older person on the front of it, they're getting a lot of angry responses. So there's something here about the need to educate the public, I think, on in terms of the education, we're looking at the need for an information, advice and advocacy service, and how that perhaps needs to work at a local level, but feed up nationally data about what it is that older people are wanting and interested in, and perhaps how maybe at retirement people need to be having a discussion not just about their health but about housing too, and their finances in terms of perhaps planning for the future as to what it is that they can afford. So what we really want to do is to inspire older people to think about housing at an earlier stage, and to do that, very much believe in an information, advice and guidance service. There's been a lot of reflection on the need for better consumer protection, and a call for the recommendations that were agreed with government that were derived from the Law Commission in 2017, that they're actually acted on. And it's felt that if we don't get consumer protection right, people will not want to go and live in this sector, and also in the specialist housing sector, and also investors won't want to invest. So this seems to be really quite key. And they're talking about perhaps in an interim to have a regulatory framework that everyone agrees are the principles that people should be working by, and then maybe underneath it underlying codes for different representative groups, for example ARCO, and that those codes should be monitored, and people should sign up to them and be assessed on them. It's well recognised, I think, by everyone that the planning system is problematic, and we're talking about the value perhaps of having all local authorities having an older person's housing strategy, where local need and supply are assessed, and that those assessments should then be aggregated and fed up to government to set a national ambition on provision. And conversations about, you know, how can we bring in health more into this equation? And it could be around the ICB integrated care boards providing a signatory to the to these housing strategies and plans. So very much we're looking in detail at the planning system, the barriers, the enablers, and thinking about whether there's a need for sort of national planning guidance and a national model design code, and discussing what that might look like if thought to be needed. And in terms of design, I think we want to recognise that most people may well choose to stay in their own homes, and that we need to also support and help them to make the adaptations in their homes, and have a sort of one-stop shop where they can go to find out how best to do that. So we're also recognising that there's a huge wealth of best practice guidance and design codes and standards, and that actually these need to be reviewed and tweaked and pulled together so that we can really think in a lot more detail about how we enhance the quality and also the quantity of age and dementia friendly homes, and also neighbourhoods. So I hope that gives you a flavour of what we're discussing in the task force. There is nothing set in stone, and we are still very interested in hearing from you about what you think we should be focused on, and even better if you can send us supported evidence to support your recommendations. Thank you.
Many thanks, Julianne. That's really quick oversight of the. I know you've spent hours and hours and hours on this already, and there's hours and hours and hours to go. But yeah, brilliant. So we're going to move on to Mario now. I think, Mario, you've got some slides, haven't you, that you're going to share with us?
Oh, yeah, you're muted, Mario.
Hello, sorry, can you hear me?
Super, yeah, that's it.
Great, thanks. Give me 1 second, I will share my screen again, sorry.
And to those listening, we did practice this earlier, so apologies.
Right, hopefully people can hear me now and
Yeah,
see.
that's
my
great. We
slides.
can see your
Excellent.
slides and you hear you. Perfect.
I'm not a regular user of Zoom. So yes, my name's Mario Ambrosi, Director of Comms and Marketing at Anchor. We're England's largest not-for-profit provider of housing and care for older people. And we have around 54,000 homes that we manage for older people across the country. We have 1,100 rented locations across England, and just over 400 for homeowners, as well as 122 care homes. My slides don't appear to be moving forward, so I'm hoping that you can.
Maybe I should take over sharing slides. Sally, can you do that, or do you need... Yeah, perfect. It's coming up.
Right.
Great. So Sally will go through your slides. So if you just say,
excellent.
Her,
I will keep going. Yes. So we've done research on older people's housing care needs for a very long time, and there's some consistent themes that come out throughout all of that research. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those themes and give a bit of an insight into some of the research that we've done most recently, which haven't yet published, but look out for next year.
Sorry, Mario, to interrupt. So sorry, do you mind if you stop sharing your screen and then I can pop your slides up for mine? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks. If you skip forward to the next one and then the one after that. There we go, yeah, that one. So yeah, those four themes come through in the research we've done over a number of years. The importance of comfort, community, connectivity, and financial and physical security. Comfort, one of the themes that comes through consistently is that retirement housing can be perceived to be a sort of one size fits all solution, and a challenge for marketers, I think, is to land messages with people who are at a variety of different sort of stages in their lives. Too often, retirement housing can be perceived as something that isn't flexible. Connectivity is a consistent theme. People value the kind of the advances in technology and the potential that they bring. What's come through most clearly in the most recent research is actually a degree of skepticism and a degree of kind of worry about how technology could potentially actually remove people's independence, in that people become overly dependent on that technology. So what's very clear is that when we're positioning technology as a solution for people, it's how do we do that in a way that demonstrates the benefits it brings without actually increasing dependency. Community, in terms of it's very, very clear consistently that people often don't want to move particularly long distances from where they've sort of lived their lives more sort of previously, and that financial and physical security is consistently an important theme, which I'll talk a little bit more about when I talk about older people's shared ownership in a moment. The key thing I think that comes through is this point about independence. And if you can skip on to the next slide, I'll just sort of summarize a couple of things that came out from some research we did a little while ago around that. So our fragmented UK research told us kind of three key things. That point about independence and people not wanting to feel the burden or be perceived as a burden is much more important to older people than young people necessarily given credit for. More than half of 18 to 34-year-olds expect that their parents will want a family member to provide care for them in later life, for example. The reality is that only 16% of over 55s want that, should they need care. 80% of the public across all age groups told us they don't fully understand the housing options that are available to them in later life. We did get we consistently see that there's a strong potential demand for specialist housing for older people. A third of over 55 said they'd be very likely or quite likely to consider specialist retirement housing as an option for later life. As you've heard earlier, language really, really matters around this stuff. In our most recent research, if you can sort of skip on to the next slide, I'll say a little bit more. In our most recent research, we didn't actually talk about retirement housing. We asked people about purpose-built housing for the over 55s. We worked with CACI to produce that research, and we looked particularly at the sort of target audiences that Julian was talking about in terms of the work of the Taskforce. So it's sort of people in the sort of lower to middle income bracket. And what we found is that when we talk about sort of purpose-built housing for the over 55s to that group, 62% of people say they would consider living in that type of housing. So actually, it's I think it ties in very closely with what Emma was saying about language being important and the lack of awareness of what's out there. In that when you start to explain this, the model and the offer to people, they're actually quite positive about it, but the awareness is extremely low. So the key themes that sort of came out of the CACI research that we've done, which, as I say, will be kind of available next year, is that comfort at home is the most important consideration for maintaining well-being. Crucially, with that group of people that we talked to, more than a quarter of respondents believe that their existing home won't support them in the future, with accessibility and the condition of the property being the key issues. Maintaining independence, security and safety and a sort of peaceful environment are some of the most appealing factors about living in housing for over 55s. However, unknown costs and the ability to fund the move and a lack of understanding of what's available are the biggest practical barriers, with key personal barriers to moving being uncertainty, the stress of moving and leaving friends and family. One of the things that's seen as essential among that group is transparent service charges and costs, perhaps not surprisingly, are the biggest practical barriers to moving. One of the things that came out very, very consistently is energy efficiency, being spacious and on one level. Interestingly, sort of messages around sustainability chimed a lot less well with the potential audience than energy efficiency and cost savings for individuals. A third of respondents think that services and facilities should be included for them to move to over 55 housing. And again, perhaps not surprisingly, the higher the household income, the more services that people feel should be included. If you're able to skip onto the next slide, generally respondents gave a very positive response to the concept of purpose-built housing for the over 55s. As I say, 62% of people said they would consider living in that type of housing. 17% weren't aware that this was an option at all, which I think is quite a significant number of people who are just simply not aware of the option at all, given that we are talking to an audience of people who are in that sort of age bracket. And I wanted to say just a little bit about OPSO, older people's shared ownership. If you can skip onto the next slide, if that's okay. We asked people about what they knew about older people's shared ownership and their perceptions of it. 76% of people said they didn't understand anything at all about older people's shared ownership. Interestingly, once you start to explain it, people, there's a significant number who are interested. Younger groups are significantly less likely to be against considering OPSO rather than those who are in the sort of older groups. 21% said that they see older people's shared ownership as a positive option for them now or in the future. So as I say, I think as marketeers, given that the focus of this is kind of on marketing, I think a crucial sort of role for marketeers is actually explaining what older people's shared ownership is and how it can be a solution for people. Because actually we certainly found through the focus groups we ran a combination of quantitative and qualitative research, and it was very clear listening to the focus groups that once you start explaining the option, actually people are quite enthralled by it, want to know more. So that point about listening to residents is crucial in understanding, you know, their views. I thought if you can just very quickly skip onto the next slide, I'll just show you the approach that we take to resident involvement within Anchor. So we have a range of different ways that we engage with our existing residents, using our residents' voice panel, which is a group of about 700 people who we can kind of approach directly on, with specific questions, and regular customer satisfaction surveys, as I'm sure lots of other organisations do. And I thought I would just finish very quickly with an example, if you can skip to the next slide, of Holly Court, which is one of our more sort of dated locations that was constructed in 1973 in Weymouth in Dorset. It was a victim of a very significant storm, and we looked at kind of what the solutions, Storm Eunice. We looked at what the what we could do with that site, given a large chunk of the roof was displaced, so an enormous amount of work needed to be done to it. The decision was made to request a cash settlement from our insurers to part fund a new development. And if you skip on to the next slide, you'll see what we have received planning permission for in September to redevelop. So the plan is to regenerate the site, to create 37 new homes, is with a C3 use class. When we finish, it will have 37 high quality social units. The average footprint of each property will be increased by 30%. Be meeting the HAPPI principles, which I'm sure everyone on this call knows about. And we anticipate an 83% reduction in CO2 emissions, and an average EPC level of 90B, resulting in a minimum saving of £400 PA in resident energy in use cost. So I guess it just shows that there are opportunities with existing stock to make some existing locations to make some significant improvements in the future. And I think I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Mario. Interesting point you made about older people's shared ownership, because actually I don't think it's just in the kind of later life years that it's misunderstood. I don't think affordable housing options full stop are properly understood. I've got a young qualified solicitor who works with me in our later living team, and she was talking to her peers at a connector event recently, and they asked her to explain what it was that she did, and they thought it's council houses. They'd got no, so this is the kind of like 28, 29-year-old group of lawyers, and they had no clue what shared ownership was, what the quality of the accommodation was. They just local authority homes, and I think that is throughout the country. I just don't think the good quality housing that's being built by registered providers now, I just don't think people know that it exists unless you investigate it. So we come back to the language, and how do we get across to the public that what options there are, both for later life and for younger individuals. Anyway, enough from me. So we're going to go on to our final speaker, Emma, another Emma Webster.
Thank you very much. Bizarrely, for some reason, mine won't scroll down either now. Oh, there we go. Let's see if that works. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So as the final slot, I thought it would probably be helpful to take you through some pictures rather than some slides that have words on. So starting at the beginning with the very first slide, Lou in her introduction outlined who Life Story Group are, but just really to explain, we have about 50 communities across the country, from as far south as Bude in Cornwall, right up to Jesmond in Newcastle, and many places in between. Traditionally, we've been a private for sale developer, but over the last few years, we've moved into the rental space. And in the coming years, we'll be moving exclusively to build to rent for older people. Turning to the next image, the picture of crisis. Now, I think probably we've been talking about housing crisis for long enough time that we've gone almost beyond what that might be and beyond that. But I just really wanted to reflect on the fact that housing for older people is the only type of housing that has been identified as being of critical need. And this was identified in a recent paper put forward by the Levelling Up Committee. So there is a real acknowledgement, and the data is there to prove that something needs to be done to help tackle this issue. And I think the work that Julienne and the Taskforce are doing will play a huge part in both raising the profile of that, but also bringing forward so many of the challenges and opportunities in the way that they can be solved. But as one of the comments was made in the Q&A and chat earlier, time is somewhat ticking as far as this is concerned. We know that there will be a general election in the not too distant future at some point before January 2025. And it's really important that all of the good work that's been going on and the actions of the task force, many all-party parliamentary groups, research work, the work that the HousingLIN does every single day, continues to influence as far as that side of things is concerned, because I think the challenge for housing for older people is bigger than any political challenge, and hopefully the great ideas and recommendations that continue to come forward from HousingLIN, from the research work that's undertaken, and from the task force will be embraced no matter who is in government after the general election. Reflecting back on some of the points that Emma and Mario and Julienne have made, I think one of the biggest challenges that we all have when looking at positioning later living housing is about the difference between the perception and the reality, and also the element of trust and the belief that people have in what we're putting forward. And I think there's a massive part that we can all play. And it was really fascinating to see the list of attendees ranging through from developers, local authorities, people who work in academia and beyond. And I think we all have a massive role to play in terms of providing that education about what we each do at a local level, the difference that we can make. Because I think when you speak to our residents, when you speak to the communities, most are very proud of the decision that they made, are happy with their choices. The only regret they tend to have is that they wish that they'd done it much sooner. But obviously none of us have the ability to turn back time. So what can we do to make sure that the next generation are educated and informed about what later living actually means? There's also a lot of work that government can do, and I think Julienne touched on some of the things that may come forward in terms of recommendations, and some of it might be more formal, which may address people's issues and concerns in relation to regulation, transparency, potential codes of conduct. But also as well, there are other things that can be done, and it would be remiss of me so close to the autumn statement not to mention what the Chancellor may be able to do in terms of assisting with things like inheritance tax and other measures, that stamp duty exemption, that would assist in terms of helping people who are looking to right size. So we will wait and see whether anything comes of that tomorrow. I think the other thing to reflect on is that there are so many, as I like to call them, superheroes in the sector, people who every day go about doing the job that they do. And I think, you know, if I reflect on one of the points that Julienne made and the value to it, the information and advice service that the Elderly Accommodation Council through John Galvin used to provide was a massive tool and made a huge amount of difference to so many people as they age, and also their family members. And I hope to see, and I'm pleased to see that Julienne made reference to information and advice being a key part of the recommendations that are looking and coming forward. But I think we can all play a part in terms of being that spokesperson, being the people that champion the sector and ask the questions. One of the things that I was acutely aware of is that often at these presentations, I talk a lot about life story and what we do. But one of the great benefits of the HousingLIN is that you get to speak to other providers and see examples of the work they're doing. So in the break from the norm, I'm going to make reference to two two kind of examples that I've learned about over the most recent months in relation to two members of the Southwest Leadership Group. The first is Coastline Housing Association that are based in Cornwall. And they have a specific challenge that they have to focus on, which is that only 1 in 10 of homes in Cornwall is classified as an affordable home. That private rents and housing prices are unaffordable to most, trapping families in poverty. The challenge that is faced is enormous, but Coastline exists to help solve this crisis. They provide housing for those in need to help improve neighbourhoods that people live in, and they provide services that improve the quality of their customers' lives. And what I thought was particularly interesting, reflecting on the topic of today's discussion, was the 3 key strands within their mission statement. Great homes to provide a range of housing options to meet people's different needs, particularly as they age, investing in new affordable homes, in places and communities, and playing a leading role in Cornwall's climate change action plan. Great services, listening to their customers and doing the right thing, to earn and maintain the trust, to provide helpful and joined up services that are easy for all of their customers, and to continue to learn and improve. And finally, great people, to support people living in their homes and communities to work collaboratively, maximising the resources that they have available, and to build on positive cultures and values so that Coastline can be a great place to work and volunteer. And I think it was fascinating, having recently been down in Cornwall, just to see firsthand some of the difference that the work that they do makes. The second reflects on a kind of a study visit, I suppose, that a number of us had to the Chocolate Quarter, St Monica's Trust property, who are a Bristol-based charity helping people since 1925. Their project there sits as part of a wider development. But one of the things that was so powerful to see was they talk about being at the heart of the community, which physically it is if you look at it on the kind of master planning kind of basis. But what's really, really powerful is actually the way in which they've opened a number of their community facilities to members of the public. So actually you wouldn't necessarily know that you were eating in a restaurant that was predominantly available for older people or drinking in a cafe. You would just think that you were in a great place that had a really vibrant atmosphere, and that was what made all of the difference. So they're 2 very quick examples that I just really wanted to reflect on from the experience that I'd learned from, and just really to kind of say that if we look at doing things the way that we've always done, that we'll always get the results that we've always had before. And I think that's been one of the wonderful things about coming to the different happy hours, the things that you can learn from it. So I don't have a crystal ball or a mirror that can tell me what the future holds as far as that side of things is concerned. But I do think that if the government takes forward some of the ideas and recommendations that form from the Taskforce, if we all learn from the research work that has been undertaken by Shakespeare Martineau, HousingLIN, and Mario gave an example from Anchor, then I do think we'll be in a much better place. I think that will then lead to communities that are approved through the planning process, hopefully at a local level, rather than having to go through delay, and ultimately giving the opportunity for people to have the choice to move into housing that may be better suited to their needs. But ultimately, the most important thing with that is the word choice, and that it's for each individual person or family to determine what's the right thing for them. So just really wanted to say thank you for the opportunity, and happy to answer any questions as they come forward.
Perfect timing. That gives us 15 minutes for questions. Just a little pitch for the Chocolate Quarter. Fantastic pizza, by the way. If you want if you want to go there and have a great pizza, it's a brilliant place. Right, Emma, because you've just finished, I'm going to keep you in tune with this one. Alison's asked around what informed the strategic decision to actually move to provide for older renters, because obviously we haven't seen a huge amount of the rental market for a number of years, but it is becoming more popular.
Feedback directly from customers and from their families. So that's what made the decision. As I reflected on, 5 or so years ago, we offered the opportunity for choice, and we were starting to see more and more people come forward and express an interest in renting. And it's for a variety of different reasons. It tends to be people want to have the flexibility as a result of potentially selling a family home to be able to free up money to pass on to children or grandchildren to use in a variety of different ways, and a result of financial planning as well. So looking at enabling, as I say, family members or friends to be able to enjoy money whilst people are alive and see the benefit of it. And I think it was that flexibility was the particular reason we looked at moving into that approach directly as a result of feedback that we had from people that had taken that step.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to go to Brian's question because it's something that's really close to my heart, but it also touches on what Julienne said about there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution here. Brian's asked whether or not we know of any mixed-age projects that have been developed that are not profit-driven. Guy Harris has also put in the chat about accessibility and how it's just so important to build everything that we build to an accessible standard, because then we wouldn't need to actually have housing for a particular generation, which gets away from the stigma associated with getting older. Emma Houghton's comments about the fact that people think that being old is always older than you actually are. So I just wanted to kind of like throw it out there. Does anybody have any comments about building mixed age projects, and is it something that we think might become more popular, and can it be cracked financially?
I take it if no one else wants to. I think one of the biggest challenges linked to that is probably part of the planning system. So actually having effective discussions with planners from the early stage about what it means to create a kind of a mixed and a balanced community is probably one of the first challenges. I think there are some great examples at a small level of co-housing, and Lou, you and I heard about some great examples recently when we were doing one of your workshops in relation to some co-housing examples down in Brighton and in Stroud, but I think at the moment, sadly, they are quite few and far between in terms of being kind of authentically and properly intergenerational. But I think there are a number of steps that can be taken through the planning system that will assist that, that hopefully will come down the line in the not too distant future.
Can I open that up to you, Julienne? Has much been said about multi-generational living?
I think people are in favour of multi-generational living, but I think I've not seen the examples of it in my trips so far. We're hoping to go to the Netherlands, where I believe it's very strong there. But in terms of intergenerational, I think we've got to think more broadly than that, and it's perhaps think more about community connectedness, and that actually the staff are all of different generations. And if we can help people to connect better with their local communities, that gives intergenerational opportunities. I think there's lots of ways of doing this. But going back to the planning side of things, there are differences if you're building older persons' properties about, how much car parking you're allowed, as one example. So I find that every stone I turn over, there's a layer of complexity underneath it. But yes, I think mixing and having a good sense of community connectedness is as important as having the right building design. So yes, intergenerational is important.
Thank you. Okay, this has cropped up quite a lot. So it's around the target audience for older people's retirement housing. So Manik has basically asked, what is the target audience? Now, Julienne touched on it in terms of what they're looking at, being kind of like that mid-range, how you unlock that mid-range group of people that are living in family homes that they actually own, probably without a mortgage on it. Does anybody want to comment on what we feel the target audience is, given kind of like the research that that we've mentioned, and that there's significant numbers of older people that actually don't particularly want to right size or move from the home that they've lived in for a long time with their families. I mean, Mario, from your perspective at Anchor, how did you target potential customers?
Yeah, I mean, targeting kind of encompasses a number of different things, doesn't it? So we're a provider of we're described as a provider of services to older people, and we start at the age of 55. The majority of our residents in our housing are kind of mid-70s. So it's a more typical kind of sort of age in terms of age. It tends to be people at the kind of older end. In terms of the market and where you position it in terms of the sort of level of affordability, I mean, we're a housing association. We are kind of our core strength. We've been going for a very long time, and our core strength over a number of decades has been in that affordable market. We think that's where we that's our area of focus, because it's an area of strength for us, and there's from our research there's clearly a demand for it. I just wanted to sort of pick up on the point as well about the intergenerational stuff, because I do think it is about the wider community-based stuff that kind of creates those intergenerational links. There's organisations, I think it's Good Gym, who do some really, really interesting stuff about how you kind of link up younger and older people to do so the young people can kind of do provide services that support older people as part of a kind of volunteering initiative, and it's those sorts of projects I think are really, really innovative and really exciting. So I think there's more and more of that sort of thing kind of developing.
Thanks, that's excellent. Right, we're going to go to Luxtona's question, which I don't know whether anyone can answer it. If not, we will come back to you on the answer. It was around whether or not anyone is aware of when the government will be bringing building regs in line to make accessible housing, the Part M Level 2, the default baseline design requirement for all new housing, because it would start to improve housing stock for all, including older people. Any nuggets that anybody might have?
I'll come in just because I haven't unmuted myself. But I mean, the government's made a commitment to do it, but when is the golden question, isn't it?
I think the phrase that keeps being used when we ask the question is imminently, but imminently without a season doesn't really mean much. Obviously, the consultation moved forward from 2022 as the most recent one that looked at the importance of it. So hopefully we will hear something soon, and I'm sure Jerome and Sally, when we get it, it will be hot off the press in one of the weekly bulletins, so that I think it will play such an important part, so we can all keep the pressure up. So maybe that's another thing, Julian, to add to the list of things that would be very helpful in the task force.
So Emma, whilst you're not muted, you are now muted. Unmuted. Another one for you. You're very popular this afternoon. It's about rent. I don't know whether you're going to be able to answer this or would want to answer this, but how do you underwrite the new tenant's rent and being able to afford it going forward, going into the future? It's obviously more expensive than a normal tenant because of the age and vulnerability.
Yeah. So I saw that question pop up, and I don't know the full answer, other than I know that we do undertake affordability assessments at the very beginning. I have got Philip's name, and if you want to message me, Philip, or confirm to Jerome that you can pass the details to, I can go and get more information as to that and happily share that one with you.
Fantastic. Right. We've got time. We've got another 5 minutes. What else have we got? Maybe one for you, Emma Houghton, actually. Is there any evidence that people actively considering retirement living necessarily view it as their last home? The attitude of someone aged 55 may be very different to someone aged 75.
We haven't done any specific research on that, but the question has always been about right sizing and being within a property that's appropriate and suitable for your needs. So I guess my understanding is that is the point, is that it should be your last, you should be able to age in place, and you should be able to be there for your later years, and that should be part of the comms and the marketing that we're explaining, so that people are aware that, right, this is it, I need to move there, and then that's it, I don't have to worry about it, I can stay here, I'll get the support that I need, that support will grow the longer I live here, depending on what the service is, and that should be in the marketing, in my opinion. And I also maybe have a slightly controversial opinion in terms of, why are we always saying over 55s, because it's not realistic. 55-year-olds won't move in unless you guys can tell me otherwise, because a lot of them have still got children who are only in their early teens. So, maybe that's something to consider.
Yeah, age demographics have definitely changed, haven't they, over the years? Emma Webster, any views on that? I know you and I have chatted about this.
I think the interesting thing reflecting on it, if I look at our average age is actually older for a renter than it is for a purchaser. So that absolutely does reflect on what you're saying, but we do have examples of people who are looking at moving in younger. It very much is based on kind of personal experience and personal circumstance. And I think the key with it is realizing that what might be relevant and appropriate for someone at 60 or 65 may be completely not appropriate for someone at 80 or 85. I think it's all about personal choice, personal circumstance, and I think the onus is on us as developer and operators to be able to answer any questions that people come forward with, be it for them or for their family, no matter their age, to be able to bring forward.
There's also the physicality of it, isn't there? I mean, if you've been living in a home for 40 years and you haven't moved, and in your kind of like mid to late 70s, can you actually face that move into a home and having to clear everything out? Because with the best will in the world, your furniture in a 4-bed house is not going to fit into a retirement scheme unless you've got bags of money and it's one of the really high-end type.
And I think that's probably one of the areas that the sector has looked at over the last couple of years to see how we can assist. And I know, having moved round about this time last year myself, I have no desire to move probably for about a decade, or until I forget what the pain of it was like, because packing boxes was not the most fun thing to be doing in the lead up to Christmas. And that's why so many of us offer the services in terms of packing services, decluttering services. If perhaps people have furniture that they don't feel is appropriate for their new home, either it's too big or not the colour they want, or they want the chance to buy new furniture, the opportunity to be able to sell that through or donate to charity and so on is there. And I think that's really one of the big barriers and obstacles that people face, that fear of, oh my goodness, I haven't done this for perhaps 40, 50 years. It's going to be a nightmare. I think the other thing as well is quite often that realization potentially that the family home has just become too unwieldy, and that's not necessarily in terms of the amount of space, but it might be something as simple as the garden used to be lovingly tended, but actually people don't have the mobility in quite the same way. And there are things that we all do in terms of developers, as things like planting raised beds that people can use, or things that are more accessible for people as they age, to be able to still be involved and part of it. But equally, if someone decides they don't want to, there's the ability for the maintenance company to pick that up and keep something looking neat and tidy. And I think it's about that flexibility that I think is really particularly important. I think something that we've all learned over time is really important for us to focus on.
Thanks very much. Right, so we're out of time. We've still got, I think, 11 open questions. We've answered 11, so we've done pretty well in that 15 minutes. As I suspected, it's been pretty popular in terms of the Q&A. So it just takes me to say thank you very, very much to our panelists today. It's been a really informative session. I hope everybody watching has found the same thing, and we will look at answering the outstanding questions, I think, offline, Jerome, won't we?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I'll share the questions with you, and if there's any questions in particular that you haven't had a chance to type, I'm talking to our audience, obviously. Don't hesitate to contact us on info@, and we'll very happily share your questions with our speakers today.
Thank you for your precious time, everybody.
Yeah, I wanted to thank everybody again, all our speakers today. It was a great session. Thank you, Louise, for chairing this session as well. Fantastic. And yes, just one last reminder. Please remember to fill the very short feedback form that will appear on your screen at the end of the session. And also, quick note about the next session. So we're back next week with a happy hour, and the subject of that session will be age-friendly housing. And will be in collaboration with Lovell Later Living. So I think I've already placed the URL in the chat box, so you can book your place now. Thanks again, everybody, and see you next week. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.